Hello, welcome back. Today from the campfire, very symbolic um, environment of what I want to talk about, which is authenticity. Because since we are social creatures, and over the centuries or ages even, we developed from the tribal communities, the fire was a symbol of survival, and the same our tribal bonds with the communities we used to live under. And being outside of that community would mean not being able to survive often, being far away from the fire of survival, fire of the warmth, fire of also mutual benefit of being in the same community. But today we actually still continue thinking in that categories, because we are creating communities, bigger or smaller, and we seem to be very connected to one another, whether we want it or not, whether we know that or not, because we still adjust to the way we are with the people around us, with the society around us. And don't get me wrong, some of these things are important and they are necessary, certain common laws to provide harmony for all the citizens, for all the people that create that community. However, since we are social creatures and tribal creatures, we often adjust too far from that sense of a fear of not being able to survive on our own. And in here, it's a very important element of my statement today. Yes, we still need each other, and we need to mind each other's boundaries, needs, and also sense of community, but not for not by all means, not at the expense of losing ourselves in all of that. And that's a fine line. It's a fine boundary between what we are willing to compromise or what we are willing to adjust, the healthiness of that compromise, and also losing ourselves up to a certain extent in the process. And that process starts for us from the very beginning of our existence, the moment we are being brought up to a certain family, healthier or less, but still that first family dictates the rules of our world. And we learn many aspects of the world based on the environment we grew up in. And whatever we learn, especially that first 6-7 years, we tend to perceive as normal without questioning. So that means that if our caregivers, parents, family, community believes in a certain standard, certain norms, certain values, we tend not to question that. And also, being a child, evolutionary, biologically, we are being wired to comply for the same reason that we as adults see the reason to be a part of the community, to survive. And that means that often what we have learned in the past, later on, can potentially backfires in sense of not allowing us to be fully authentic selves. And as I mentioned before, that authenticity has boundary, because it cannot override people's health and well-being of all the people around us. So we need to comply to a certain level. However, today I want to especially think in terms of complying that overrides our authentic self. And that is most of the time, when our survival does not depend on that, a question of our boundaries. Boundaries, and also a sense of judgment that we project, that we might be receiving. If people don't like us, that means that's the evolutionary part that began awakening in us, It means I will be excluded, I will be outside of the boundary of the community, and therefore I won't be able to live, basically, if I'm not part of that community. But that also means that often we start interject, meaning like interrupt ourselves with our authentic verbalizing our thought, or asking for our needs based on that projected judgment, or in, of course, extreme cases, rejection. And that often means that we take on that compliant role in our life, sometimes a notch too far. And as I said, often it's because of that family we were born in, or a society or culture that we mold ourselves after, that can be revised later on in life. If it is still applicable, am I need to be obedient to my parents still, or it was only down to a certain stage of my life? But also in terms of the values, many people grow up in some type of cults, or the unhealthy cultural norms, that if they are lucky enough, they can revise that in the future when they set themselves free from them. However, when we think about our life, it's often very similar situation based on the culture and values and the behavioral patterns we grew up in or developed in our early stage, that we tend to replicate without really thinking if it still makes sense for me. And often there is a moment in life when we start to reflect, and that most of the time it has a lot to do with some crisis in life. Something happens that our life collapses or relationship breaks, that we start questioning it, either out of self-reflection, or we then indulge into therapy, through which we then investigate what drove us to that point in life. But we can also prevent that tragedies, some of them, by reflecting much sooner. And that's the moment when we decide to develop that self-reflection, and we then do the freeze frame once in a while. Okay, I did say that or didn't say that, anticipating that reaction from either a loved one or society, or even sometimes we have this ridiculous thoughts in a social situation: oh, that person observes me, and what would they think of me? And often we care for no reason, and that stirs in us that compliant part that reads of our authenticity. And don't get me wrong, you can live like that, and there is nothing wrong with that as long as you are happy. But it often strips us of our life potential that we can fulfill in our life if we are the person who is supposed to live in my life. Because we are different, we have different roles, we have different opportunities in life, different purposes. And if we only try to cater to other people's expectations of us, we only replicate their version of us. And that's often not fulfilling. Many people come to therapy also for that reason. They were fulfilling somebody else's dream of life, or a version of themselves, without reflecting what I want, or who am I, or how I would be, not experiencing that fears of rejection. So that's often that reflection that is a potential possibility for us to discover. Is it me? Is it really me? Or maybe I can risk new behavior and see how that happens, how that makes my life either better or worse. There's nothing wrong with experimentation. In Ireland, they say only cow doesn't change their mind or her mind. So it doesn't mean like already a change in that behavior will mean people will tag me as that type of person. Basically, who cares? Sometimes we are worrying about people's reaction when they are absorbed in their own, life and mind process at that stage. So we often worry too much. We're creating that sort of prison of our thoughts, of our fears, of our expectations, or other people's expectations of us. And that often creates dissatisfactory life that many of us have a chance to revise at some point and redesign maybe life. Some of us don't. Maybe some of us question it too late and the major decisions of life are already made. So I'm sharing that with you to invite you for that reflection of how often I do things that I don't feel it's me, but I do it in order to be included, in order not to be outcast, like in that tribal communities when we were outcast and we were left to die because we could not protect ourselves, we could not fend for ourselves, provide food, protect from wild animals and so on. But nowadays all that wild animals and all that fears and are often self-inflicted, and we create these mental prisons for ourselves based on that fears that are not fully justified. So I think some cow is trying to break in. And I think she heard me saying that she doesn't change her mind. So it's an invitation, and maybe one word about a little bit tougher version of that early on education, which might be related to certain traumatic events in our life, or being brought up in a dysfunctional families or communities that probably, needless to say, require some revision in later on in life if we were brought up by family or community that did not function very well or were straight abusive, because we might be like certain that we are repeating some of these behavioral patterns that are not serving us nor our close ones. And if it's not blown up yet, it might blow up soon enough. So it should be a motivation for self-reflection sooner than later. And often that process for those of us who went through certain difficulties or traumas might be a little bit more complex than for those that just find out I'm not as authentic as I can be. But it's very worthy to do that, because then you have much more freedom in all other spheres of your life, as you discover that you can do different. You can actually be more in tune with the person that was supposed to be living my life than the one that was educated to be obedient. So yeah, authenticity then, it's a opposition or opposite of being obedient for no reason. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being compliant or being respecting other people's freedoms and respecting other people's right to live in whichever way they want. But there is also certain fine layer of our authentic self that is down to our individual self, our individuality, that creates the society too. And if it is missing, if it is getting lost, we're also losing it as a bigger scale of a community and societies of people that hopefully drive that world towards better place and not towards dark age anymore. So, invitation for self-reflection and authenticity. I hope you find it useful, and I think the cow is not breaking in anymore, so I can safely go. Have a great day. the nature with a chair.